So today we will be talking about large cities with depleting populations and how smaller cities are beginning to grow in population with migration of residents from these big booming cities of the US. Large cities in the United States aren't growing like they used to. With large cities becoming too crowded and taxes are hiking, people are beginning to migrate to smaller cities that are developing. Large cities versus small cities. Larger cities seem to have higher taxes, higher unemployment rates, and also a large factor for people moving is climate, being as my examples are New York City and Chicago, being on the East Coast and the Midwest, having very hot summers and then very cold winters. And also another factor would be cost of living. And then we have small cities that have lower taxes, more job opportunities, the climate is better, and the cost of living is much less. My first example will be Chicago, Illinois. Chicago, Illinois is one of the top three largest cities in the United States. It is also the top city currently with the most amount of residents leaving the state. Most people say it's because of tax hikes, the climate, and the corrupt government. Myself, I moved to Denver from Chicago, and I can agree with all of those statements. Also, I will say as well, it is becoming very crowded at the same time, and the infrastructure is just not there to appease the amount of people in the city. Um, the amount of traffic is insane. The amount of people is just crazy. But Chicago itself, even though it's a gorgeous city, it's very expensive to live. My next example will be New York City. It comes in at number one with the most populous cities in the United States, housing more than 8 million residents. In recent years, the population has declined due to high taxes, cost of living, and also climate. My next example for a small city will be Fort Collins, Colorado. Colorado currently is one of the most fastest growing states in the country. In the last 8 years, the state's population ballooned by 12.8%. My next example of smaller cities will be Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington area of Texas. Over 600,000 more people have moved to the metro area than left over the last 8 years, um, contributing to a 16.9% population growth. And my last example of a small city would be Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford area of Florida. The Orlando metro area is one of the only 9 nationwide to report a population surge of more than 20% between 2010 and 2018. Population migration. Um, First off, we'll start out with the large cities. With Chicago, between the years of 2010 and 2018, the population decreased by 190,022 residents. And then New York, between the years of 2016 and 2018, just in those 2 years, decreased by 77,228 residents. Moving on to the smaller cities, Fort Collins, between the years of 2010 and 2018, actually grew by 50,068 residents. The Dallas-Fort Worth, Arlington, Texas area grew by a substantial amount of 1.1 million residents. And then we have the Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford, Florida area between 2010 and 2018 grew by 433,763 residents. Next is our employment rates. Once again, we'll start out with the large cities, with Chicago unemployment rate being at 4.3% and New York City being at 4.2%. Our smaller cities have actually much lower unemployment rates, with Fort Collins being at a 3.1% rate, Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, Texas area being at a 3.6 rate, and then the Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford area being at 3.2%. Fort Collins has actually added 24.6% in employment rates. Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington has added 23.1% rates, and then Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford area has added 26% rates in jobs. The numbers, as you can see right next to the percentages, show you how many jobs have been added since then in that time frame between 2010 and 2018. Next, we'll talk about the income tax rates. Once again, we'll start with the large cities and their high taxes. Chicago coming in at 4.9% income tax rate. It's a flat rate for the whole state. And then we have New York State. Taxes ranges from 4% to 8.82%. But then we also have New York City has an additional income tax on top of the state tax, ranging from 3.078% to 3.876%. Then we have the smaller cities. Fort Collins at 4.6%, which is kind of high. And then we have Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, and then Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford, which are at a 0%, which is substantially much better for residents of that state. So now we'll talk about the climate, mainly in those larger cities that I was talking about, being New York City and the East Coast, and then Chicago and the Midwest. These regions have very cold winters and hot, humid summers. And then they have spring and fall seasons that are mild but seem to be very short. And then we have Texas and Florida in our southern belt for the most part. It's high temperatures throughout the year with dry and humid heat, with winter months being a little bit more cool temperatures that are very comfortable. And then we have Colorado with the West, which still has 4 seasons, but they seem to be more mild winters and dry summers.
Well, for a state with a massive budget deficit and the billions of dollars, this is disturbing news.
Yeah, for the first time since the late 1980s, Illinois' population is shrinking. Dorothy Tucker takes a look at what's luring people away.
Financially, it's a lot better here.
Your dollar goes a lot farther down here with the houses.
A lot easier to find a job in Indiana.
The sun shines here almost every day.
Weather, work, money. 3 of the biggest reasons people are leaving the state of Illinois. According to the Illinois Policy Institute's Michael Lucci, 95,000 people moved to other states last year.
We actually had more people leave Illinois than were born in Illinois.
Tara Morales Johnston and her family just packed up a condo in Lincoln Park, headed for a house in Crown Point, Indiana. Why did you move?
The cost of living is a lot less expensive than in the city.
In Chicago, she paid $6,700 in property taxes. In Crown Point, she pays $2,400. And the expense for her children's education dropped from $51,000 a year to $18,000.
Did you guys read any books today?
Michael and Allison Prilasky found similar savings when they left Downers Grove for North Carolina, where they bought a much larger 4-bedroom house.
We would never have been able to afford that in Chicago.
Prilasky had a hard time finding a teaching job here. He sent out 1,200 applications, got just 3 interviews, but no offers.
He came down to North Carolina, interviewed with 2 schools, and got both jobs.
Carrie Graham spent months looking for retail work in Chicago. How difficult was it to find a job?
It was more difficult. It just seemed like more people were trying to get to a job.
She's living and working in Indiana now.
We have fewer jobs, more people looking.
Right. Compared to When the Great Recession began, we're still down about 230,000. So that's a lot of excess workers all competing for the same jobs.
And it's harder to start a business in Chicago. Licensing paperwork takes 30 days compared to a week in other cities.
It's an entire month of bills that you pay for your business while you're not generating any income.
What could public officials have done to have kept you from leaving the state?
If it was more affordable, it's got a lot to do with taxes and the cost of living.
Dorothy Tucker, CBS 2 News.
And the Illinois Policy Institute says another reason people are leaving our state, our property taxes are the second highest in the nation. So where are people from Illinois actually moving? Texas, Florida, and Arizona are the top three.
Next, we'll take a look at the migration amounts from 2010 to 2018. I decided to put it on a graph, so it's more of a visual representation, with Chicago and New York being in blue, and then those smaller cities being in red, so you could see the substantial difference of decreasing and increasing of migrations. Now we'll talk about the median household income. First, we'll start out with Chicago being $47,831, New York being $66,739, and then we'll move on to Fort Collins at $64,980. Then we'll go on to the Dallas area at $63,870. And then the Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford area at $52,261. As you can see, there's a big difference being between those large cities and those small cities, but realistically, with those large cities, Chicago coming in at the lowest, but with the highest taxes. And then New York obviously coming in at the most, but the cost of living itself is pretty large. So you can see the differences and why more residents are more appealed to these smaller cities. Next, we'll have a true-false question. The Dallas-Fort Worth, Arlington, Texas area had the highest amount of population increase between 2010 and 2018. That answer is true. Dallas-Fort Worth, Arlington, Texas had population growth of 1.1 million residents. Next, we have a multiple choice. Which city has a 4.6 income tax rate? A, New York City, B, Fort Collins, or C, Chicago? The answer is B, Fort Collins. It has a 4.6 income tax rate, just coming under Chicago and New York City. We can conclude by the end of this presentation that large cities around the United States are pushing citizens away, with smaller cities growing and developing as a new frontier with more job opportunities, lower costs of living, and the appeal of better climates. Larger cities hiking up taxes and higher costs of living are pushing their residents away and pushing people to smaller cities around the U.S. for a better way of life.